George, would and should be aware of. So I should have got where's my PowerPoint presentation? There we go, share. Oh dear, right, I needed to go to the beginning, hold on. From the beginning, right, okay. So what looks like a pretty long agenda is not actually as long as you would think, because some of these things are very simple. I'd like to talk to you guys about the whole area of improving your knowledge of the game, okay, including the laws. Then I'll talk about the 2020 law change, singular, some of the law application guidelines that have been issued by World Rugby. Talk about one other issue, quite a significant sideline management issue that I think I'd like to highlight to teams. Perhaps maybe just review some of the 2019 changes, because there were quite significant changes in 2019. Talk to issues, game management issues such as front row requirements, Scrum engagement. Talk about another important area of the game, concussion and concussion management. Then I'll talk about the 2020 law trials, which, as I mentioned, may be a matter just of interest to people, but are not specifically relevant to us in this part of the world. And then just to conclude, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of a discussion afterwards. As people who are passionate about the game and scholars of the game, I think that it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we learn and that we are scholars of the game. As such, I would really encourage all of you who are not already signed up on World Rugby Passport to do so. Just Google World Rugby Passport. You go in there, you can register, you log in. There are a couple of benefits to this. First of all, it gives you access to a whole lot of information, but more importantly, it adds you to the World Rugby database. One, in terms of getting information for yourself personally, but also just in terms of helping your country, because the more of you are registered on there, the more, the greater the country's standing is with World Rugby. So I would encourage all of you, if you're not already registered, to get onto Passport. I would also encourage you to go on and take the laws exam. I challenge you to take the test, okay? This certificate doesn't qualify you as a referee, but it does in fact certify that you are familiar with the laws of the game. And maybe we'll be a little bit less argumentative on Saturday afternoon when the referee makes a decision that you don't quite follow or understand. As players, as officials, as coaches in particular, we have a duty of care when it comes to our players. We are responsible for their welfare. As such, I think it is really the responsible thing for all of us to do is to take Rugby Ready, to go online and do the Rugby Ready. I'm not sure whether it's a requirement in your in your union. Certainly one of the things that we have been lobbying for in Zimbabwe, and I'm taking off my Rugby Africa hat and wearing the Zimbabwe hat, was to say that all players and all coaches must take Rugby Ready. We haven't succeeded in getting that done, but certainly we now require that all match officials, before they take to the field at the beginning of the season, have their laws, have Rugby Ready, and have concussion management certificates, and they must provide them. This is something that I would suggest that as administrators, if you haven't already done so, that you might want to consider. Now, getting to the law change. There really is only one minor law change that did take place that has relevance to us in this part of the world. And that, I think you're all familiar with the fact that World Rugby has now said that it's no longer possible to score a try at the base of the post. I think the rationale behind this was that it was becoming increasingly difficult to defend against that legally. With concerns about safety, you know, the posts have got wider and wider, and it just was not possible for people to do that without either body checking or blocking. So, you know, doing an American football type move. So the law framers have decided to drop that as one of the ways of scoring a try. So gents and ladies, that's it. We can all go home now. Okay, we're done. All right. No. Okay. So that's the only law change. But I think there are various other issues that I would like to talk about. But before we do that, I just want to remind you all that the 2020 law book is available online. You go to just Google World Rugby or World Rugby laws, and you'll get to the World Rugby website, and there's a link there where you can download it. But there's also an app which is available on Google Play as well as on App Store. So it can go onto both Android phones and onto iPhones. And that app you can put onto your phone. It has all of the laws. It's interactive. Well, not interactive, but it also has video clips relating to those laws. I would suggest that it's something that anybody who's interested in the game would want to have. Now, there were some concerns, and there always are some concerns at the top level about the extent to which the laws are or are not being applied. So a special group was formed and met last year in September. They met again in March of 2020. You see there the list of the people that were involved. It included coaches, referees, players, medical people, as well as World Rugby staff. They concluded that there was no need to really look at new laws and law changes specifically with regard to the breakdown, which, as you all know, is the most controversial area of match officiating, of playing, etc. But they did feel that there was need to perhaps revisit and reinforce some of the key aspects of playing and officiating this particular phase of the game. Now, again, guys, this is not rocket science. And if you're expecting me to come out with some huge, great big revelations, then I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed, because in actual fact, all of this is what we all should have been doing anyway. Okay, and so they talked about the various different players at that phase. That first of all is the tackler, and they must talk about the fact that the tackler must release. Obvious, I guess. And they talked about that the tackler may contest possession, but there's certain conditions that must be met. In other words, he or she must get up off their feet, must show clear release, and then must come in from the direction of their own goal line. All right? Or that player must roll away and get away from the breakdown. So far, I don't think there's anything. Then, of course, they talked about the ball carrier. And again, guys, this is all going to seem very obvious, but that's the game that we play. Ball carrier must place or play the ball immediately, and they shouldn't be allowed a second movement, such as rolling, crawling, bouncing, or anything. The one exception, of course, is that if that is to reach out to score a try, if that person is within reach of the goal line. And that when that ball carrier's knee hits the ground, they must release immediately. The next thing, obviously, would be the first arriving player, the jackler. And I think that the emphasis there is on saying that the person who gets there first must be given, rewarded for getting there first, provided they do so legally, that they do so on their feet, and that they're in a strong position to try and lift the ball and get, once they get their hands on the ball, that's it. The jackler must support their body weight throughout, none of this going to ground and then resetting. You see the guys often will go over, fall down, and sweep back, right? That's something which we are trying to discourage. First of all, it hinders fair contest for the ball. Then the other thing is the other arriving players, okay? And they must arrive through the gates, right? And penalize, coming in from the side must be penalized. That guy usually comes in, falls over the ball, or takes out the receiver who's coming to take the ball, and it interferes with clean, fast ball. Okay, and then also encourage that player, if they're going to come in, to bind on the opponent and drive him through rather than to dive you know, or to tackle them, you know, where you're going to get people that all fall down. In other words, drive the person so that you go out and the ball remains behind, rather than tackling that person, having that all fall down, and then the ball becomes unplayable or it becomes difficult. And invariably what happens is somebody will do something illegal. All right. So those were the areas that people felt needed to be clarified in terms of guidelines. At this stage, I don't know if, George, should we just go right through before we entertain any questions or discussion?
No questions so far.
Okay, all right. Okay, now there's an area last year, during the course of the year, the Hong Kong Rugby Union wrote to World Rugby seeking clarification on the whole issue of whether people who have been tactically replaced, when they can and cannot come back. And I think that part of that had the confusion arose from the introduction of item C there, where a player goes off for an HIA. Now, as many of you know, HIA, you probably won't, even in international, in this part of the world, you won't apply HIA. There are several requirements before head injury assessment can take place. So what we do is we talk about, what do we call it? Oh my goodness, it's just struck me. You know, the player, a suspected concussion must be taken off the field, recognize and remove. It's right there. Sorry, I should have. Okay. So basically, there was a need just to clarify the fact that a tactically replaced player, as all of you know, if a player is taken off due to injury, he may not come back under any circumstances. The exception, obviously, being a bleeding player, and then that person has 15 minutes to stop the bleed, a blood injury, and then come back. So there was a change that was made to and let's say that a player with a head injury. So that player with a head injury would either be going off for a head injury assessment at that level, or would be taken off as recognize and remove. And that was added as being one of the circumstances under which a player could come back, as a replacement. The situations that we're talking about there in terms of nominated player 3.1 and 320, you all know your laws, I'm sure. That refers to a situation where a front row player is either yellow carded or sent off, in which case, when you come to the first scrum, somebody has to be sacrificed to bring that player back on. So these are the circumstances under which a tactically replaced player may return to play. And I think it's important that we all have an understanding of this, because I know there are very many arguments that arise from people not clearly understanding when a player can and cannot come back, when a player can and can be taken off. So these are sort of things that I think it's important for coaches and players to know and to understand. Right. In 2019, there were quite a few changes. It was just before we were going into the World Cup, and there were quite a few of them, and many of them didn't have specific relevance to play and to players, but there was the whole issue of just defining, before that said only qualified doctors or physiotherapists. I think there was need to qualify that there are also other suitably qualified medical people, medically trained people, particularly medically trained in terms of the World Rugby courses for that. There was also just the change of offside at the ruck. Before they talked about the hindmost foot of the player, but in fact now they talked about the hindmost part of the player. That may not necessarily be the player's feet, so that's fairly straightforward. Offside at the scrum, for many years, I think there's been this problem of the scrum half stepping into the V. It's always been something that we've always, striven to get people to manage. But I think finally the law framers recognize the need to specifically state that is something that the Scrum half may not do, may not go into that area. And then again, there was just a matter of just clarifying some of the issues in terms of blocking the throw at the line out. I think it was just an omission in the previous law book that just needed to be set straight. Okay. And then there was also the introduction of the whole issue of supporting a team player. Okay. First of all, that you can't drop that guy. And then this issue of not holding him up for an extended period of time, because that of course creates a real problem. Once you're holding a player up in the air, the opposition may not touch you, they may not touch the supporting player or anything, otherwise they're subject to penalty. And if you hold the guy up there forever, then play is more or less suspended. All right. Now, I thought that it would be useful for us to revisit something that again is also a source of tremendous angst and arguments and problems at rugby matches. And that's the whole issue of front row requirements for two reasons. One, more often than not, it's the other way. We don't have enough props. And then very quickly we end up saying, well, we don't have enough front row forwards, so we have to go to uncontested. And particularly when one particular side may be dominating at the scrum, it ends up creating controversy. But anyway, it is the responsibility of you coaches as to ensure that you have sufficient front row players. And depending on the squad size, I don't know, George, what for your domestic competitions, what sort of squad size do you have? Do you go the full 23?
We have a full 23.
Okay. So if we go the full 23, then the law states you must have 6 qualified front row players. And basically on the bench, you must have a loose head prop, a tight head prop, and a hooker. In other words,
yes, we do.
Yeah, you must be able to replace any one of your front row players with somebody from the bench. That's a law requirement. And certainly if you don't meet that requirement, one would imagine that it's the organizers, it's incumbent upon the organizers then to take steps against you if you fail to comply with that. It's not, there's nowhere in the law necessarily that it states you will be penalized. But again, certainly you would never get away with going to an international without having those 3 front row players on the bench. I don't know whether you guys have any recommendations on the Scrum process, etc. I've just shown you this is an example of what is in place in Zimbabwe. And in fact, it was drawn from guidelines of South Africa. The Scrum being a potentially dangerous area, there's need for us as match officials to be very careful and very cautious in how we manage it. These are just some guidelines. I don't want to create any hassles, but if certainly the union or the referees want us to give copies of these, I don't know if you use any specific guidelines on this. This basically talks about different approaches to the Scrum management, with age. You'll find that the requirements as you go up in age become, change a little bit. For example, that at Colts level, there's just no contest, okay? And then and there's no Scrum push. So basically what it is that with, as you go up the ladder, you become a little bit more accustomed to the Scrum, and eventually you get to the point where it's fully contested. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'm happy to send copies if people are interested. Now, I mentioned, George, sorry, did somebody say something? Okay.
No, none.
I mentioned at the beginning the duty of care that we all have as people who are involved in the game. And certainly one area that I think has been of particular concern to World Rugby of late has been the area of concussion and concussion management. There is no head injury assessment in Kenya. There is no head injury assessment in Zimbabwe. There's no head injury assessment pretty much anywhere in Africa except in South Africa, because we don't have in place the facilities, the manpower, etc., to actually have that. There's a whole lot, not just on field and sideline, that goes with the whole issue of head injury assessment. And the approach then is that where it is not mandate, and it must be, you must apply to World Rugby, you must meet certain requirements, and then they will specifically give authority for it. There is no competition in Africa other than in South Africa where head injury assessment applies. As a result, we all follow the whole thing of recognize and remove, okay? And when it comes to concussion, at all levels, but much more so at under 19, our approach must always be to err on the side of caution. If we're in doubt, then sit them out. I always say to our referees, better that you incur the wrath of an angry coach that you took his player out, than you have to deal with a grieving mother or a grieving wife or a grieving father. Okay, so it is very important that we are all critically aware of that, we are vigilant, and that we keep our eyes open for that. What is it that we're looking for? People, you're not going to learn how to properly manage concussion from this talk. I mentioned to you that there are very many online courses and facilities on World Rugby. It's World Rugby's passport site. You must go on there, do the concussion management course, do the Rugby Ready. But these are some of the things that you need to look out for with a player. Obviously, if the player is convulsing, then clearly there's a problem. But complaining of a headache, certainly if a player is knocked out, or if a player is nauseous after having received a knock to the head, especially, these are warning signs that player must go off and must receive medical attention right away. They're unsteady, they're confused, dazed, dizzy. All of these things are things that we need to look out for. And that player may be your star player. He may be the guy who you think is going to win you the league, but he's not going to win you the league if he's actually in hospital, or worse still, you know, in a coffin and 6 feet under. Okay, you must get that person off immediately. I want to remind all of you that when it comes to, well, to anything, the referee is the sole judge of fact on the field. A medic may come on and say, no, this player can go on. And if the referee is not happy for that player to go on for whatever reason, then that player is off. Okay. He or she has the duty of care, and he or she, if they're going to err, it is better that they err on the side of caution. Many of you may, I don't know if one of the referees can talk. You guys don't have the blue, you haven't implemented the blue card there, have you, in Kenya, have you?
Not yet.
Okay, but you're aware of it, right?
Yes, it's under discussion.
Yes, that's right. It has been put into place in South Africa, and certainly I know that your colleagues in Zimbabwe last year introduced the blue card. Basically, it's an additional card. You know, we love cards, our yellow cards, our red cards, and a blue card. We want to have a full set of the rainbow before long. But basically, it is to signify to everybody in the stands or whatever that that the person has a suspected concussion and that they must go. Once a blue card is shown, that player must go off. And in this part of the world, unfortunately, folks, that player is not going to come back. There's nobody who can go on the sideline and say, oh no, he's okay, he can go back. If he's sent off for a suspected concussion, that's it, they're done. He can be cleared thereafter by a medical person to say, okay, fine, he doesn't have to go through all of the steps in terms of sitting out rugby and training thereafter. It's an unfortunate thing, and yes, if we make mistakes as match officials, guys, what you have to bear in mind, as I said earlier on, is that for us, it's better to err on the side of caution, okay? Especially when we're dealing with under 19s, when we're dealing with children and young players. Okay, just as I mentioned to you that, that this is a much simpler form. The one that other unions use is a lot more difficult, but this is a sample of what the Zimbabwe Rugby Referee Society uses. And it's something which, again, if it's under discussion, I would suggest you guys speak to your colleagues. You can speak to us. You can speak to your colleagues in South Africa. They will be able to advise you on approach. Okay. I mentioned it again, as I said, that online you can, under the section player welfare section, you can and should all go and do the concussion management course, and even to download some of the material that's there. Okay, I would suggest that every club should at least have some of a full set of concussion management documents there. And certainly your first aid people should have them and should be aware of it. You have some qualified medical people there, and I would suggest that you might want to organize some courses for the clubs and even for player representatives and referees to deal with the whole issue of concussion and concussion management. Right. I think that most of you, when it came to law changes, probably were looking at the law changes that have been put in place in Australia and New Zealand and so far, and I think that they'll be applying some of them. These were some of the law amendments that were introduced. I honestly don't want to spend a whole lot of time going through them because I think that it's just going to throw us off our game. This is just really for academic purposes. I think many of you can go online and you can have a look at them, or you can do that. But this is some of the laws with regards to the kick and wanting to create space and expand sort of tactical choices for players. Okay, and it talks about now, obviously, the advent of COVID-19 really put paid to a lot of the planned trials, because they were supposed to take place in some of these countries, Argentina, Brazil, blah, 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 etc. And as many of you know, there's been no rugby for the men for the last couple of months. So I have to confess, I'm not absolutely familiar with what the current situation is with regards to World Rugby when it comes to when all of these guys do open up. But there are specific law amendments and changes that have been implemented in New Zealand and in Australia. And I think that many of you will have seen them. Okay. One of the areas that has been of concern has been the issue of the tackle. People who've looked at it have said that yes, tackles that are even below shoulder length at the chest level may be legal, but there certainly has been a lot of evidence to show that they result in a lot of injuries. When a person is tackled at sort of shoulder height, the risk of injury to both the tackler and the tackled player, the tackler and the tackled player are high, particularly with regards to heads bashing, etc. So they're looking at perhaps adjusting the height of the tackle to trial that, and that was to be trialed in the Super Rugby. I'm not sure if they've actually implemented it. I have to check and see. Okay, reducing. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. Reducing the tackle height to the waist. That's what I All right. Ability to review the yellow card when the player is in the sin bin. Again, this doesn't apply to us, and it also implies that that people have recourse to TMO and to instant replay, and we don't have that by and large in our rugby, so that's not likely to be to come into effect. Yeah. But I think that obviously what it was trying to do is to make sure that where perhaps a player should have got a red card, and rather than waiting for him to be cited afterwards and thereafter, then maybe justice can be meted out to that player more immediately. Okay, and then just another one also that talks about trying to penalize players who have a whole lot of yellow cards. So basically, you're talking about a blanket approach to punishment there. Okay. The other interesting thing, awarding a goal line dropout to the defending team when the ball is held up. I think the rationale there is it's basically rewarding good defense. I don't know. I imagine that we probably could debate all night as to whether or not that that is or isn't a positive, but maybe we can discuss that a bit later on. But it would be purely academic. So, people, I'm not sure what you were expecting. I probably were expecting a whole lot more than that, but that is that. I'm happy for us to enter into any areas of discussion, any areas of clarification with regards to the existing laws. Well, they're all existing laws that we might have. Over to you, George.
I have two questions. I guess
George.
it was clear about the law change, just one. And just to comment on that, we didn't have many tries scored against the post padding because I'm sure most teams train without them. So whenever they get near the post padding or the post itself, play is stopped in training. So players are not used to it anyway. The question is from Simon Odongo. Let me just retrieve it. This is it. How would you differentiate a tackler and assist tackler, and what legal ways is the assist tackler allowed to contest the ball, considering he or she is on his or her feet and arrived legally?
Okay, well, the law is quite clear. A tackler is the person who has brought the player to ground and also himself or herself goes to ground. Okay, the tackler assist, as has been mentioned by the questioner, is on his feet. But that person, then the tackler assist has to do two things. First of all, he must release. And then secondly, he can re-engage, but he must do so coming in from the direction of his own goal line. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Simon, does that answer your question? Simon?
Silence means concurrence. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, great. Cheers, Simon. All right.
The second question is from Almasa Bonfotra in regards to concussion. How long is it recommended to sit a concussed or supposed concussion out before returning to full training? As much as he's asking it, he has been answered by one of our paramedics here.
I was going to just suggest that I'm not qualified. And
no, I'm not suggesting anything, Mr.
No. But what I was going to say is it also depends on the severity of the concussion, and that's not something that I'm qualified to check. But there is a minimum, and if I remember correctly, and perhaps my medical colleague can clarify, the minimum is 3 weeks. But that person with a suspected concussion must seek medical attention, and it is the medical person, is the doctor, who will deal with that. And guys, I just want to stress, and I don't mean this as a slight to any of our doctors or medical guys, but it's quite apparent over the years that not all doctors and not all medical people are necessarily familiar with trauma medicine and, particularly sport. So really, one must go to somebody who knows and understands concussion management and sports and everything. But again, as I said, how long must that player go out? My response would be, it depends on how severe it is, and it's really up to the medical people to determine and decide that.
I believe that's the same answer he was given.
Okay.
Yeah. From Lamek Ongati of Nakuru, the question is, what are the limits of physio in making decisions if the medical doctor is not available during injuries?
Well, Well, I don't know. The medical guy could answer that. But again, as I said, what you really need to ensure you do have is you have suitably qualified people who are there. Now, my suggestion is that the physio, again, as the same as the match official, should err on the side of caution when it comes to making a decision on field. Don't leave a player on if you're really not happy with the state of that player. Perhaps the medical guy. I don't know who is the medical guy who's on here.
Ali Shere.
Okay, Ali. Do you want to comment on that?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Ali. About that, for the limit of a physio, according to the scope of conduct, most of them are not allowed to. They can give if a doctor is not around at the field, a physio can also make a decision to either to remove a player or to continue the game. But for the will of the game and for the will of the person, you must to remove that player from the field. Okay. So that you can avoid further injury or you can limit to death.
If I think it's very simple. If there's any suspicion or hint of concussion, that player must go off. Full stop. End of story.
Yeah, you just go out. You just go out. You wait for a series of tests for almost 21 days for an adult. If it's under 18, you go for 23 days until you are certified that you are clear for any symptoms of concussion. Then you go back to play.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Further questions, George?
Sorry, everyone, I was on mute.
Okay.
The question is, in case that a front row player is injured after just coming on as a replacement, can the player subbed come back if the team still has more subs?
Certainly, that I think was the whole nub of that particular thing. As long as that player who went off did not go off as a result of injury, then yes, to replace a front row player, then that player may come back. Yes. Okay.
The other one is, can a tackled player be allowed to get up if he or she is close to the goal line?
A tackled player. Well, I think that, what we said is that, remember that once a player is tackled, right, they must immediately either place, pass, or, the ball, right? And, but he may not make any movement except one that's immediate, and that's to score a try. In other words, if you're tackled and you're brought down within arm's length of the try line, you can then make one further movement to score a try. That is the one time when a player may actually make an additional move after being tackled.
Thank you. Guys, just to note, if you feel like the answer doesn't go back to your question, please raise your hand again and read it again, and we can try and discuss it. From Lame Kongati again, after a concussion, are referees allowed to find out if return to play protocols are followed?
Well, this is often a bone of contention that we have. The referee's responsibility is within the field of play. It ends thereafter. Thereafter, it really becomes the responsibility of the organizer to ensure that that's being complied with. It's just the referees don't have the means. We don't have access to player information. We don't have access to player lists. So even when it comes to either concussion or when it comes to sent-off players or anything, the responsibility for monitoring that and lies with the organizer of the league. The organizer in the event of an international would be Rugby Africa or World Rugby, depending on whether it's World Rugby qualifier, etc. So no, my question is no, it's not the referee's responsibility to do that. It actually becomes the responsibility of the organizer, be it the league or the province, or I don't know who governs your leagues. Okay.
Mudiwa, just to add on that, I believe that's why the blue card is being on trial in South Africa, or they have implemented, because now the match sheet will show a blue card against the player who concussed, and then it can be followed by the union.
But yeah, well, once a blue card is shown, I showed you the form, there's an obligation then on the part of the referee to fill in that form. And we didn't dwell on it too long, but at the bottom of that form are two email addresses. One is to the Referees Society, and the other one is to an email that basically was the person who's been charged with gathering this information. And in particular, at schools level, there is now an individual who's charged with saying that they will follow up with the schools to ensure that that player either has been seen and cleared by a qualified person, or that that player is now sitting out the next 3 weeks or more, depending on what is being prescribed. There's a duty then on that school to actually report back feedback. So that is not the referee's refereeing body's responsibility to follow up on. It's the organizers.
Thank you. From Charles Ngovi, regarding collapsed scrums, we see at times the referee says play on. Shouldn't there be a concern on safety and stop play? That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
no,
we can answer that, then I can read the other one.
No, they certainly should be. I think that what has happened in the past, and again, this becomes a matter of discretion. You know, very often the scrum will have collapsed, but the ball is at the base of the scrum. It's gone out. There's no danger of people pushing. It's gone down, but the ball goes out, right? But still, basically our thing to referees is the scrum collapses, blow your whistle. All right. But again, yeah, all right. Blow your whistle. I agree. Right. You guys are trying to catch me out, right? I see Charles Ngovi having a good laugh there. You got me.
The second question from Charles is on the lineouts, regarding lineouts. At times, throws that are not straight are allowed due to the defending team not contesting. Is there any law to support this?
Well, if the ball is not straight, it's not straight. But you know, one of the things that we have tried to stress to referees, I'm now again, unfortunately, wearing my Zim hat, particularly at junior level, where it's very difficult, is to say, look, let's try and have some latitude here. And we tend to say is anything between the ears of the two players you should let go. But I think that it probably is not very wise to allow blatantly crooked throws to go, even if the other guys don't contest it, because then where do you draw the line? The guys contested, they'll say we didn't contest it because it was so crooked. So, I mean, a crooked throw is a crooked throw, and you deal with a crooked throw when it's crooked, full stop. But let's also be reasonable. Trying to get a 9-year-old to get a ball pinpoint straight down the middle it's a very difficult thing. You know, we pin people for that, and then when it comes to the scrum, somebody puts the ball under the lock's feet and we say, okay, play on. You know, it just is also an issue of, you know, as referees, we are there to adjudicate what is, what is fair. Fair contest is what we're looking at. Whether a team chooses to contest or not, the fact of the matter is that they must have a fair chance of contesting. Okay.
From Gregory Sang, in regards to under 19 competition, when a player is injured and it's not concussion, maybe it is a leg injury, and as a referee you can see the player limping seriously, can you order the player to leave the pitch?
You know, some of these things require some kind of local law variation. For example, and again, in Zimbabwe at under 19 level, unless it's obviously it's a competition, international competition. At under 19 level domestically, there is no limit to replacements. You can actually have as many people on the bench as possible. And the rationale behind that is then there's no incentive for a coach to keep a player on the field, because he's got so many replacements, he can replace them. I want to remind coaches of under 19s, of youngsters, again, those words that I mentioned earlier on, duty of care. We have a duty of care when it comes to those youngsters. If a player is struggling, take him off. They're not conditioned the same way that international players are conditioned, where they can run off an injury, right? If that player is really struggling, get him off. Err on the side of caution. It'll give you another chance to get somebody else to get out there. No game is worth the life or the well-being of a youngster.
Very true. Is that okay, Sang? Okay, moving on from Simon Dongo. In the case of a suspected concussion of a player who has just come on, is the player who has gone off allowed to return regardless of his or her position of play?
Provided that player didn't go off as a result of injury, and provided that player is, if in the case of a front row player, provided that that player is a qualified front row player. In fact, it's not just the front row, it applies to the tight five, particularly at the junior level. So yeah, yes, that player may, I think that's what we were trying to stress there, that a tactically substituted player may come back, but only under those circumstances. Oh, wait, hold on a second. We're talking about a front, if it's a front row player, or if the player who's going off due to an injury, it was due to foul play, or if that player is going off as a result of a head injury, or if that player is going off as a result of a bleed. Sorry, I misspoke there. In other words, blood sub. Yes, then that player may come back.
Thank you.
Okay.
And no more questions from my end on the chat. Guys,
that
you
puts
can
us just 2 minutes. I've come in within 2 minutes of the hour. You should pay me extra for that.
There's another one from Charles, and he's smiling. I can see him smiling.
Charles wants to make trouble.
Here it is.
Yes,
At times, the rack. Okay, say.
Go ahead.
At times, a rack is formed very close to the post pads, which means the defending team must be behind the try line. If a defender stands in front of the post pad, is he or she offside?
Yes. Yes. If he must be behind the hindmost part of that ruck. If that ruck is against the post pad, then he's got to be on the line. But again, just remember, the offside line is the hindmost part of his side. Now, if that hindmost side is on the post pad, then that is the offside line.
This is says it's okay.
Okay.
Charles says he has got the answer well.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Guys, anyone with any question? Sorry, Mudiwa, come in. Anyone? Any question? Any comment?
Yes, Paul.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I've really enjoyed the discussion, very informative. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, okay, that's it. I know I've joked about payment, but I'm not getting paid. But what I will insist is that every single person in this room must buy me a beer when I get to Nairobi the next time. Okay.
That will be done. That will be done, I'm
Okay.
sure.
All right.
Just before we log off, Mr. Chairman, anything you want to add or say? Because you got a chance to speak at the beginning, but I think we kicked off before. You had the chance.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think mine is just to appreciate Mr. Mudiwa, who's a great friend of Kenyan rugby and African rugby, for spending this evening with us and kicking the tires on the laws. I'm sure we've learned a lot, and there are obviously lessons for Kenya rugby on some of the things that we need to institute. And one of them is certainly looking at this blue card option, because we've seen it in local games. A player gets concussed, he's carried off, but next weekend he's playing, and every club says that the guy was checked. So we really have to take this player welfare matter very, very seriously. And I think there are a couple of other recommendations for us to think about and see how we're going through a whole review of our regulations at the moment. And so it could be a good time to input some of these. So other than that, also to just appreciate all the attendees today.
Yes, very good.
Can see
very
we
good
have,
turnout.
yeah, very good turn up. I can see the broad spectrum of the game is represented. We have coaches, we have match officials, we have club chairmen. So, and not just from Nairobi, from across the country. So I think this is very good, and we as Kenya Rugby will continue to facilitate this sort of programs. The other thing just to mention, as you go back to your clubs, we're having a lot of dialogue with the Ministry of Sports about the return to play protocol. I think there was a meeting earlier today, and this is top of mind for government on how sports is going to return. And one of the things, I know we've sent circulars about it, but on the World Rugby Passport, there are sections about return to play protocols, and there's one to be done by coaches and players and also club administrators. So I'd really encourage each of you, as you go back to your clubs, please send that message. That way, I think, will be the main theme for our webinar next week on how do we get ready to be able to play, because everything else seems to be easing. I don't know when it will happen, but we need to get into shape. And then finally, to just thank also our team at the Secretariat, Tio, Malik, McKenna, for the work that they continue to do to just keep the rugby flame alive. And yeah, it's a pleasure being here. And Mudiwa, you're most welcome. If we have Safari Sevens, we'll certainly see you sooner than later.
Well, I look forward to that. I really have missed the last couple, and it's really been a part of my life that's been missing. I always boast to people how many Kenya Sevens, Safari Sevens I've been to in my life.
Never a dull event.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Okay.
All right.
Read your laws, people. Read your laws. In fact, Chairman, you should make everyone take a laws exam.
Yeah, I think it will be prerequisite. Laws, rugby ready, COVID, concussion management. And I think I'll start so that I can hold everyone accountable.
Great. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Right, everybody. Thanks very much. Good to see you. Looking forward to seeing you all in person sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mudiwa. Thank you, everyone who tuned in today.
Okay.
Asanteni sana. And we hope to see you next week, Mr. Mudiwa, because we do this weekly, on a weekly basis.
Okay.
And we'll send links to you. I'll send links to you of all the seminars we have done so that you can share with your guys.
Thank you. That would be great. Paris, where are you? Paris, you owe me some push-ups. Anyway, okay.
Yes, Mudiwa.
Yes. All right. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.
Guys, you can leave at will. And asanteni sana.
Malik,
Yes.
I think tunaweza fika mpaka pale, si ndio?
Wapi?
The point is that penye amefika the blue card. I think you can go until there. Unanisikia?